Good evening, my name is Thomas Caldwell. I'm the programmer at the Melbourne International Film Festival. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we're gathered on the traditional land of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respect to elders past and present. Welcome to the World Online, a MIFF Talks event presented in partnership with the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences. This year, the MIFF Talks program is presented by the University of Melbourne, Faculty of Fine Arts and Music. For information on other events, do please visit miff.com.au/talks. I shall now hand over to tonight's moderator, Hilary Harper, who used to do the traffic reports on ABC local radio in Melbourne. She went on to present Sunday breakfast there for 10 years, and she's now the host of Life Matters on Radio National. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you, Thomas. It was actually Saturday breakfast, but let's not quibble. Sunday, if only. Welcome to this live panel discussion for the World Online, and you may not know that we're actually recording this to play live on Life Matters on RN2. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to make a lot of noise after we've welcomed our guests in the interests of radio magic. I don't know if you've ever tried to explain to a young person what it was like before the internet. It is a stark reminder of how much things have changed. On social media now, we can create identities and connect with people in seconds. But how has the digital world revolutionised our relationships with ourselves and each other? And how is popular culture dealing with these questions? Let's ask the A-team of online culture and relationships. Dr. Khandis Blake is an expert in gendered conflict. Her work considers how behaviour and attitudes associated with gender are influenced by biology, culture and economics. Professor Yoshihisa is a social psychologist who looks at how individuals' activities in interaction with each other can generate and transform what we call culture. Liza Mandelup is an award-winning filmmaker and a collaborator for online platforms. Her film Jawline won the Special Jury Award for an Emerging Filmmaker at Sundance, where it premiered. And Professor Liza Phillips is a clinical psychologist who has worked with young adults and adults, and lately her work's been focusing on trauma, stigma and worry. She's Deputy Director of the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences. Liza, in Jawline, we meet 16-year-old Austin Tester, who's an aspiring social media star. Tell us a little bit about him and his world.
So Austin is, the film starts with him wanting to be a live broadcaster, but the specific world he's in is where these teenage boys broadcast their seemingly normal life with no like real talents involved. It's just kind of you living their life with them, and they all these girls watch them, and it kind of plays out like this fantasy that these girls have, where they're getting to know someone that is kind of like a boy that they wish they could know in real life.
And what did making this film teach you about authenticity? Because there's strong contrast, isn't there, between what Austin shows on the screen and what's just off screen in his world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it definitely made me think about, well, when I went to make the film, I started thinking about what's the layer behind what we see, because we're so easy to have our emotions be involved in whatever we are seeing online. And I don't feel like we question like the authenticity of everything we get, because when things are sold to you as real life, you just accept it like real life. And I think live broadcasting is a great example of that, because it's like, well, you're just broadcasting your life. And this world that I'm in specifically in the film is they're kind of selling normalcy. Like I'm just like the boy that you would know at school, that normal boy. And I think that was the area that was most interesting to me, because it's like, even in that case, there's still like a whole curated aspect to it.
And Austin's really into curating positivity and love, and he spouts these aphorisms, they just roll off his tongue so easily about, chasing your dreams and not letting anyone stand in your way. But the contrast between that online landscape and Austin's physical landscape is really interesting. It's really run down and decaying and a bit lacking in hope. So is his positivity genuine, do you think?
I mean, I think you have to think about what positivity culture is. It's like you telling yourself that things are great enough times to truly believe it. And it's about you being told that by other people and you telling other people that as well. And I think in his specific world, it was targeting teenage girls who feel insecure, they feel lonely, they're bullied at school, and he's telling them, you are loved, or you're pretty, or you don't, you look great with no makeup on, and how was your day, and you deserve the best. And I think that is like, it's a whole weird world.
Well, how savvy is that audience? Are they worried about the authenticity dynamic?
The girls, you mean?
Yeah.
I think that it plays into the whole manipulation that's online, that they're there because they're drawn into it. They're not there because they're questioning it. We're questioning it. They're there because they're drawn into. They are receiving something, and they're not thinking, what is this thing I'm receiving, and how is it affecting my emotional well-being?
But some influencers are much more successful than others. What is drawing the flocks of young girls to particular influencers over other ones, do you think?
I think it's filling a void of sorts. So I think, a lot of the girls that I met in the film, they had problems at school. They were bullied, or they had parents who were really absent or struggling financially, just got divorced, and they felt really lonely. And here's this boy that could be like a boy at school, and he's offering companionship, and whenever I log on, he's there. And he says if I give him X amount of money, he'll FaceTime me, and all these things that I think that you're escaping something, and you're going to the online world to get what you need.
And they choose some of them more than others. Are they the better looking ones, or the ones that seem more positive?
It's all about connection. So it's like everybody has their favorite based on who they connect with and who they have, who gives them the most personal time. And so in the film, you see like a lot of these boys, it's kind of like how it's all about delivering the most of yourself to these people because they want so much. And because they're needy, they become needy just like any relationship.
It's so disturbing. I feel like we have this connection, he and I, but he just doesn't know it yet. Okay. Lisa, is our mental health being compromised by our social media use? Can we say that we are actually tracking worse since we all started using social media?
Unfortunately, there's some evidence that supports that. There's evidence both looking at what were 15, 16, 17-year-olds like 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and so forth, and what are 15, 16, 17-year-olds like now. And some of that data does seem to suggest that there is higher levels, prevalence rates of things like anxiety and depression in particular now, in young people now. And then if you look at, well, what's happened over that course of time, one of the things that's happened is social media. Now, it's not the only thing, and correlation does not mean causation, but it's an interesting thing to look at. Then we've got other studies that have looked at levels of use. So people who use social media quite a lot compared to young people in particular who don't use social media so much. And again, we see the same thing. The heavy use is associated with higher levels of depression, anxiety, suicide ideation, unfortunately, than lower levels of use. Again, correlation is not causation, but the horse is bolted. We can't look at a group of young people who don't use social media. So this is the best that we've got, a bit of a proxy looking at what was it like before social media and what were things like now. And I don't mean to say that it's the be-all and end-all, it's the number one explanation, but it's certainly an interesting and I think a compelling thing to look at. So then we need to understand what actually might be driving this. And I think some of what you said there, Liza, is really pertinent to that. It's the connection and the response that people get and the reaction that people get and what happens when that drops off and the likes and things like that.
Is there a gendered component to that? Do girls and boys react differently?
There's some suggestion that boys or young boys who become addicted in however you define that, social media, and there's actually a study in Japan looking at this with the hikikomori, I can't remember how to say it properly. There's a phenomenon in Japan of social isolation. Yes.
Hikikomori.
Yes.
Yep.
That young men who use internet a lot tend to do a lot of gaming. That's social isolation, and that's not really social connection. Whereas young women who use social media a lot and internet a lot, it's around social connection. So there seem to be some, and that's very broad, generalisation, but there do seem to be some gender-based trends, yeah.
And so there's a connection in the research between the culture of likes, attracting likes to posts, and perhaps a relationship to our mental well-being.
Potentially, yes. So that our sense of ourselves becomes dependent on how many people like what we do, and you know, it's genuine. That's what seems to happen. I was hearing a story of a young woman who had a haircut, decided to get a fringe before she'd left the hairdresser. Selfie taken and getting both likes and unlikes. And this was before she'd left the hairdresser. That's a foreign thing to me. Like, I'm like at home, you know, peeking in the mirror. But this girl is, you know, and so what drives that, to have that immediacy of a response? I think that's fascinating. Why so quickly needing to get that feedback?
Well, Khandis, a lot of people blame the Kardashians for this crisis in body image that we're told that we have. But is technology creating the problem or enabling the problem?
Look, I think technology is enabling something that's always been there. You know, it's very easy when we see all these people taking selfies, and there are a lot of them. I mean, we're talking about 23 billion selfies a year that are uploaded, you know, to the internet. And again, 1 billion of those, probably the Kardashians, but still 22 billion, still a lot for the rest of us. I mean, it's easy to see this kind of behaviour and think that what we're dealing with is some kind of narcissism that the internet is enabling. And there definitely is an element of narcissism there, but I think focusing on the link between, say, narcissism and online behaviour obscures something else really important that is quite fundamental, and that is about social climbing. And, you know, we often don't think of it this way, but you can earn big bucks online these days by cultivating the perfect image, by showing the right version of yourself, by, you know, by monetising how you look. And we know the Kardashians do it, right? But there are people in Australia doing this as well. I mean, Kayla Itsines is an Adelaide fitness blogger. She has 12 million followers. She's earning $30,000 a post on Instagram, okay? If I were earning $30,000 for every photo that I put on Instagram, I would be taking a selfie right now. You know, like, so you've got to understand that as well as the narcissism and as well as all these kinds of odd things the internet is enabling, it's also enabling us to do something very fundamental, which for certain people, which is socially climbing, trying to make their way in the world, particularly in environments where they may not have very many other options.
It was really interesting to me in Jawline, Liza, how the likes and the attractiveness were a form of currency. Like Austin was saying, people used to think he was gay, which was clearly not a marker of status in his community, in his world. And then when he found some success, he started getting hot girls texting him, and that was a marker of status. So do you think that that is true, what Khandis is saying, that you know, looks and likes can really get you places in that world?
I mean, yes, the film is called Jawline because that's like the epicenter of like what gets you in the door is the aesthetic. So I think that absolutely, but I think that it like also whether people like stay around for you or not, for a developing mind, it's a lot to handle. If someone keeps tuning into what you're doing when you're 16 years old, or if everybody suddenly like doesn't like you, that could like push you over the edge. You know, I always thought about this when I was filming with these kids. I'm like, well, you are facing so much rejection on a daily basis. Even I felt like when I was in high school, walking through the halls of high school, there was potential rejection, but it was not in my face like the way it is today. And so I would experience these kids going through stuff where, you know, no one's watching me. I feel like I'm falling off this platform, and like they're so like they're just thrown off their rocker by this in a way that I'm like, you shouldn't have to go through this at that age. You're adding like another level of stress to the already stressful years of your life.
Yeah, and it's not just whether or not people like you, it's whether they're just observing you. There's, you know, you just have to be noticed.
Well, they don't even know you. So like, you know, they're upset that people aren't showing up anymore, or less people are showing up, and it puts this value into your existence that we shouldn't have. Like, you shouldn't have a value to whether or not you're worthy of someone's time or something like, or someone sticking around for you.
We'll talk a bit more in a moment about how tribes form and identities form online with Yoshi. But Khandis, I wanted to ask you, your work has suggested that female bodies are more sexualised online where there's more economic inequality, not gender inequality, and that's strongest in developed nations. What is going on there?
Yeah, good question. I mean, look, female bodies are sexualised more in general everywhere, but we do see a bunch of sexualisation of men online too. You know, we don't want to get sexist about it. Men can be objectified.
Yeah, Austin was whipping his top off all the time.
Well, yeah, he did definitely put some stuff out there. But yeah, it links back again to the social climbing thing that I'm talking about, right? So one of the things about economic inequality is it stokes status anxiety. It makes us really aware of where we sit in the social hierarchy. It makes us want to climb the social hierarchy. And, you know, we had a look at the number of sexy selfies that people were posting around the world. We did this in 113 countries. And we found that it's not random. There are more sexy selfies in particular areas around the world. And as you mentioned, it's places where economic inequality is really high. It's also places where women in particular tend to earn less, are more likely to be unemployed, have less health insurance. So basically this is kind of painting a picture of, you know, a sexy selfie in that environment could reap you large rewards. Not just Instagram, but you could potentially meet someone or advertise yourself in some way to catch the eye of someone who could lift you out of your circumstances.
I mean, economic inequality strikes women disproportionately to men. Isn't it also gender inequality if you've got economic inequality of that nature, that women are earning less, they have fewer opportunities?
Yeah, good question. So we actually controlled for that in the analysis. So we were able to see, is this economic inequality at the societal level? Is this economic inequality just amongst like a gendered component of economic inequality, men earning more than women? And it wasn't the latter. It was really a society where the rich earn more than the poor. That's where we're finding the effects happen more.
So, I mean, women are making really rational decisions in that context, aren't they, about the value of their looks? These looks can get me places in a real world sense. Is there any way the sexy selfie or female nakedness or hotness online could be reconfigured as a paradigm for female empowerment?
Look, I don't know if I would go so far as to say all the women doing this are doing it consciously, you know, are doing it strategically in this strategic way. A bunch of them aren't, you know, a bunch of them are just reacting to the same kind of cultural pressures. A lot of us feel, male or female, every day about how we should look. But I do think there is a proportion of women who are doing this in quite an assertive way. They're doing it to try and lift themselves out of their circumstances, to capitalise off what they've got. I mean, I definitely think there's a proportion of women who know that youth is paramount here. This is like a pot of gold. It's not going to last forever, and they're working it. And, you know, it's all well and good for us to go, oh, well, they shouldn't work their bodies, but maybe they don't have much else to kind of work within their scenario, and they're trying to get ahead, and, you know, I think we've got to have compassion for that.
And if they wait till we smash the patriarchy, they'll be pretty odd.
They'll be waiting for a while, right?
Yeah. So is it problematic doing research with online communities? How much can you tie what's going on in an online cultural space to the economic or gender situation or cultural situation of other particular geographical places?
It depends on the kind of research you're doing. You know, there's some really simple stuff you can do where you can scrape the big data that's publicly available, things on Twitter. If you've got the permissions, you could potentially look at Facebook. Don't worry, nothing I do is like Cambridge Analytica, all right? So we can all relax there.
So comforted.
Yes, very. But, you know, when you're looking for things like sexy selfies, it's pretty easy. You're looking for posts that have certain hashtags in them, right? Sexy, selfie. People are putting these posts up because they want people to look at them. So they're using hashtags that are obvious. You know, it's not very obscure. But really then it's just a matter of linking that to where the posts come from and what characterises that environment.
Yoshi, when we look at culture online, is it about each tribe having its own culture, or is there some kind of transnational internet culture?
Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. I don't think there's much research going on in that space in and of itself. But speaking first about a kind of tribe culture, I mean, of course, there is a mechanism that generates that, right? Because on the internet, people tend to interact with each other in a very narrow channel of things, and they either using text or images, and that is going to be happening very fast, and tends to be more self-reinforcing, right? So whatever you do tends to be returned in kind, and that tends to kind of bootstrap itself up, and whatever you kind of try to create it tends to be recreated and they're reinforced, and the social construction is going to happen because there are many other people who are looking at you and responding to you in the way you want them to respond. So that sort of a positive feedback loop is going to create your image in of itself, and the internet environment is built for that. But another thing is that whatever you kind of do tends to produce what they call the echo chamber effect, right? So whatever you say is going to go to somebody else, and that person is going to do something else, and eventually it might come back at you. So it's like an echo. Whatever you say comes back to you. And that, again, is producing this positive feedback loop that generates this momentum in and of itself. So both the way you communicate to each other, that tends to produce the kind of cultural pattern, and also people who like that kind of culture pattern tends to join you as well. So in both ways, the selection of partnering with the people who are like-minded, and also those people who are linked together tend to become like-minded as well. And that produces that kind of tribal culture. And the interesting question is to what extent are those different pockets of tribal cultures are going to be communicating to each other, and the online or offline. And I don't think we know very much about that.
That was my next question. Is there something about internet communication dynamics that makes it harder for groups to communicate with each other? It sometimes feels like tribes are getting ever smaller and more niche.
I think you're right about that, but I don't know if there's any research out there to say that. But one thing we know is that the online communication, online social behaviors tend to be actually conforming to the social norm of the tribe or the community. So because you don't have anything else but your socially constructed self and identity, that the only thing that governs your identity, constructed identity, is the norm that's constructed in the online environment and community. So it's much more actually norm-abiding than offline community, is what some research has been showing. And what that means is that each community is going to become tighter and tighter, right? And then if those communities are trying to differentiate themselves from other communities, well, my speculation is that that's going to create these sorts of very much siloed environments. But it doesn't mean that those people who are participating in one community, online community, offline will be doing something else, right? And so there's always that possibility that online identity might be very different from another online identity that you might have in a different community, or offline for that matter.
That for me raises the spectre of men's rights groups and the surge of online misogyny. Khandis, how does social media bolster that kind of thinking, and does it also have the capacity to combat it?
Look, men's rights groups is a really interesting one, and I think that one of the things that we need to take into account when we try and understand these behaviours is the degree to which they're linked to online dating and how popular people feel that they are when it comes to online dating. And one of the things about these online dating algorithms in this online dating world is that it's not unbiased. Okay, this is a very biased world.
Yeah.
The algorithms that you use on Tinder have a similar kind of function that the algorithms that you use on Netflix. Okay, so it means they're great at showing you what's popular. It's great at making some judgments. Oh, you like this person, maybe you'll like that person. But they're really actually very inaccurate. If we were to all do a speed dating event here and you had to pick your top 5 dates, or we were going to have you all fill out an online dating profile and a machine was going to pick your top 5 matches, those top 5s probably wouldn't overlap at all. Really, the stats on these algorithms is they're about as accurate as chance. Now, let me bring this back to the MRAs, right? So we've got this online dating world. The algorithms aren't very accurate. Certain groups are categorically marginalised, and those groups get resentful. Now, there may be something else that's marginalising these guys as well. I'm not saying they're all diamonds in the rough and we should give them all a go. But there is an inequality here to this online world of dating, and I think the MRAs are a particular group, and particularly the incels, who are reacting to that, saying this is unfair. They're claiming that the problem is something other than what it is. I mean, they talk about the root cause of the problem being about feminism. I don't think that's accurate. I mean, I think they've missed the mark there. But in terms of there being an inequality in how people are dating now, I mean, that is, I would say, pretty accurate.
Well, it's interesting, I think, when those stories hit the mainstream media, a lot of people tend to think about the traditional way people used to meet. It's like, well, maybe these people are exhibiting unlikable qualities when they're meeting people in cafes and bars.
Right.
But the majority of people now meet online, don't they? Like, it's unusual to meet people in real life. So it's a different way of thinking about the world.
It is. I mean, we've probably got, I think it's about 20% of marriages now started online. Most people are dating online. The Tinder, right, which is one of these very popular dating apps, makes 20 billion matches per day. All right, so this is a huge market. The average Tinder user is logging on 11 times a day and swiping left and swiping right and, you know, making all these really fast decisions. This is just a wildly different world to what we were dealing with in the past.
This is The World Online, a live panel discussion with the Melbourne International Film Festival and the University of Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences and on Life Matters on RN. I'm Hilary Harper, and with us, just a reminder, is Dr. Khandis Blake, Liza Mandelup, Professor Liza Phillips and Professor Yoshihisa Kashima. Now, we're good at seeing the dark side of technology. I mean, when we look at mass shootings and the most recent spate of mass shootings, and when we think about white supremacy, unmoderated sites like 8chan have been implicated in those. What can we do, Lisa, do you think, to stem this kind of extremist propaganda spreading, if anything?
Oh gosh, that's the big question. And I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer. I mean, there's always been propaganda. You know, before we had computers, before we had the internet, there was propaganda, and you know, people try and stop propaganda in certain ways. Governments try to greater and lesser extents of success. So I'm not sure that we can. I think that. And you know, and then there gets into discussions about free speech and everything like that, you know, that we've seen recently in Australia even. So I think it's a very vexed question that pulls in a whole lot of different aspects of society, and it's not a simple thing to you know, come up with an answer.
So maybe from a mental health perspective then is the question, if this is a largely unpoliceable space, is it about harm minimisation and teaching people strategies for individual safety?
Well, possibly, yes. Being not just accepting what you see at face value. You know, unfortunately, the internet is a great space for misinformation, and that's one of the big worries from a mental health perspective. You know, it's great. People can share their stories. There's lots of destigmatisation opportunities. There's lots of opportunities to link people in with services. There's terrific online services that are available. You know, all of these things are really great. There are a billion apps for doing this, that, and the other thing. Largely not evidence-based, largely not evaluated, largely not linked with anyone with any credibility, and you wonder why they're there. You know, is it, again, the money side of things? And then there are spaces where people can talk and share their experiences, which is terrific, but there's also an opportunity there to share misinformation, which I think can be concerning. But you know, then we don't want to get all heavy about it either.
Well, Yoshi, when we think about tribes and the kind of tribes that form around hate speech, are there ways that psychology tells us we can connect with these people, form empathetic connections, perhaps change some minds?
Now, that's a big question.
This is my specialty.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. Well, I have to think on the spot. But so, I'm not very optimistic about that. As I said, there's a norm, and there's a online persona that you have to protect most of the time, and people are very unlikely to deviate from it. So once some sort of visible social identity or some kind of even personal identity is created there, the people are very unlikely to budge, I don't think. But another interesting question is whether there's any sort of offline possibilities, or if there are any ways of creating links between different communities, and is there any safer space where people can come to and be able to, I guess, recreate the social identity, personal identity. If that sort of thing is possible and invite people to come to that safer space, maybe, but I'm not very optimistic at this stage.
The documentary Bellingcat that's screening at this year's festival on citizen journalism investigations
Yes.
into government cover-ups,
Yeah.
that really made me wonder if the idea of truth as we know it is a bit outdated or irrelevant for digital natives. Do people go online looking for their truth, the truth that already confirms what they know, or is there still a space where truth can be debated and discovered?
I think there is a place that is possible. That actually Bellingcat is a very interesting example, because it sort of presents a contradiction in many ways, because we tend to think that the online environment is where things can be completely created and physicality has no meaning. But in fact, what they do is to look for the trace of physicality that enables them to piece together the facts and transparently show that this is the fact on the ground. And in many ways, that sort of almost like citizen science and citizen journalism is an interesting positive side of this extremely publicly available information that the internet enabled us to have. And in that sort of ways, probably inadvertent facts and truths may be discoverable. And there's that interesting kind of a tension there between the extreme secrecy and the constructed nature and the inadvertent physicality that sort of gives us a link to the real thing.
And the terrifying level of access they had. They can find work addresses, street view, house addresses.
Yeah.
The documentary also had a commentator saying we don't have a rational relationship to information, we have an emotional relationship to it, which on the surface is just terrifying. You know, you think about the different ways fake news and the idea of fake news gets used. Does it also leave a space open, though, for us to make emotional connections with people and perhaps get the truth out there in a way that people will accept?
Yeah, let's hope so. There is an interesting thing. And in the past, I think, we're more likely to stumble into some kind of information that might have challenged our preset prejudices and the worldviews and whatnot. But in the internet environment, actually, we don't stumble upon information, but actually we look for information. And also we are fed the information by the algorithm, as Khandis was saying, in a way that confirms your past search pattern. So in many ways, the kind of internet environment makes it very difficult for us naturally to encounter something that challenges us. But because of this searching, the more active nature of information search, it's possible for us, I think, if we can manage to educate ourselves, to actually try to challenge ourselves. Yeah. So instead of looking for confirming information, try to say, all right, I believe X. Well, what if X is not the case? Well, then can I look for information to confirm that, not X? And then perhaps there's a way of going for it. But that requires a different kinds of culture and the different kinds of education as well. But anyway, we'll see how it goes.
When I was thinking about this session, and obviously I'm thinking about questions about the dangers or potential threats of online spaces, but I also remember growing up in the country in Australia, and the internet being the best thing that had ever happened, because if you were a nerd, suddenly you could find other nerds, you know, and you didn't have to be isolated in your tribe of one at school. Is there potential in online spaces, particularly to make room for people who might not have been represented, who might not have had a space where they felt comfortable, people who are not white or middle class or Western? Are there spaces online that are welcoming for people like that?
I believe so, and there's greater possibilities of doing so. I mean, in many ways, the setting up internet and the Wi-Fi is much cheaper, right? So the poorer countries are able to leapfrog and get to that sort of a connectivity much more quickly. In say 100 years ago, in order to get some kind of connectivity, the country, the nation had to put in a lot of infrastructure. Now it's much cheaper. So that in that sort of way, the voices can be heard a lot more, and that's part of the dynamism and the danger and the risk both of the internet, I think. Yeah.
Liza, Mandelup, is there a racial element to success in social media world? Do you do better if you're white, or are there spaces that open up for non-white actors as well?
Ooh, I don't know if I'm like the person to ask.
You're
that
like our
question.
resident social media expert now.
I definitely did not. That wasn't like what my film was about. So I'm not sure if I'm like the right person for that question, because I actually have there's a lot of diversity in the fangirls in the film. I think a lot of the boys that we followed, and also with the boys too, there was diversity. So I think it's more of maybe like a class struggle than that. What I experienced was people feeling like they need out of their situation and they don't know where to turn, and so they turn to the internet to get out of that situation. And you know, in my film, I had boys that were live streaming and fangirls, and they were both really similar, seeking a community online. They needed to get out of their situation. The boys equally had some sort of trouble going on at home or financial troubles or something, and the girls did too, and so they connected on this level of trying to escape their real life. So that was kind of like the world that I was in.
It's fascinating too, isn't it? Because the parents are probably terrified that their teenage girls are spending all this time online, but the girls were explicitly saying in that film, our friendship group is toxic. My schoolyard is rife with bullying. I feel safe online. I've found these people that accept me and can give me love and notice me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were touching up on this, but I do feel like I always found it was really complex, that to be a teenager now you have to develop two versions of yourself, your real life self and your online self. And it's hard enough to become one person, let alone these two different people. And I think, like you said, these two people can be very different. And so what ends up happening is, if you find this community online that you love and you go to school every day and you don't really have many friends and you're getting bullied, but then you log online and everybody loves you and everyone's nice to you, you decide that you don't like your real life self and you only like your online self, and you go further into that world and you don't really have the balance anymore. So I think that's like a lot of what I experienced on all levels.
There's a really beautifully made film called Share about a terrible event in a teenage girl's life. And it was fascinating because the girl kept saying to her parents, "We can't tell anyone. I don't want to take this further. It will just be worse if this gets out wider." And the parents saying, "But surely these are the channels that we go through, you know, we have to." And it was fascinating seeing that the girl just knew exactly how the thing would play out once the narrative was out of her control. And it was a really interesting contrast between different generational views of what goes on online. I wonder, Lisa, if you have any thoughts on this idea, whether social media is neutral. Is it just like a carriage service for love or bullying, or does it tend towards one or the other?
I think we bring to it what people have been saying here tonight, is we bring to it what we want, really. So I think that we create it in a way, as Yoshi was sort of saying, and it's not a neutral space. I don't think we can it's not a neutral space in terms of what you might look at, because the algorithms are directing us in certain ways. It's also not a neutral space in terms of how you portray yourself either. And you can choose not to portray yourself and disengage from that, but then, then you've got costs that come with that as well. So I don't think it is. I probably have to think about that a bit more, but my first thought is no, not a neutral space.
Yeah,
Yoshi?
I might make one more comment. Yeah, I agree. It's probably not completely neutral. The online environment, I think, tends towards more extremity. So it's just what we know is that not just online but offline too. The communication tends to happen along the emotional lines. So what's emotive tends to be communicated, and it could be positive or negative. And so whatever you feel, you tend to say. And probably that kind of norm exists in the internet communities more so than the offline. So it just tends towards one way or the other. It's just that if a community is more negative, well, it tends towards a negative and hate. And if it is positive, it might go towards the extreme positivity, which to the point where you begin to doubt the authenticity of the positivity, right? So.
And
How would you say? Yeah.
That actually, following up on what you're both saying, actually has a lot to do with what goes viral as well. So what's going to go viral, notoriously difficult to predict, but we do know things that generate really strong emotions are the things that are going to be more likely to go viral. It could be strong hate, it could be strong love, it could be strong envy, but these things are going to be more likely to go viral. And the algorithms, which feel like a fifth or sixth person on the stage here right now, but the algorithms for YouTube, for example, also have picked up on this, right? And if you turn on YouTube and you Google, let's watch a video about running, before long, if you keep on watching the next video up, you will find a video about ultramarathons. Same if you look at a video of Donald Trump, before you know it, you will start seeing videos of white supremacist groups, because what keeps you engaged is more and more and more extreme things.
And that is what terrifies parents about porn, isn't it? This idea that it is a stepladder that has to get more extreme the more your child is watching.
Right, and I don't know specifically about the porn world, but definitely in terms of the online economy, I mean, this is an economy built on capturing your attention. And there are so many different things you could spend your attention on online that the pull towards things getting more extreme is strong.
And Liza, in your film, it's really clear how teenage longing is commodified. It's such an economically, mediated world. What are your thoughts on the media executives that are, pushing and nudging and pulling the strings there? Is this basically Beatlemania for a new generation?
I just thought it was really fascinating that a market existed that was capitalizing on teenage girls' insecurities. So that
Another
once
one?
Yeah, I think that, exactly. So I think that once I realized what was happening, once I entered the world, I was trying to figure out who was controlling it and why, and who had the money, and I had all those questions. And I think that, there's a whole system to it where the girls have this void that they need filled, and the managers know about this, and the managers know what the boys need to do to fill that void, and it becomes a whole marketplace.
It was fascinating too that one of the influencers that was advising Austin at various points said, that's what social media is. You have to put a fake smile on and film the video. This is your job. And Austin kind of nods, but he also says things like, I need to get big on social media so I can change this world. What do you think Austin actually wants out of his job, what he's doing?
I mean, I think, I don't know, at 16, do you really know exactly what you want? I think there's a lot of follow culture online, so sometimes people are just seeing someone else who's done it successfully and following that. I think that what Austin knew he wanted was out of his town and out of his life and out of his situation, and that he was very adamant about the whole time. And I think that social media and specifically live broadcasting for him was something he had access to. He had Wi-Fi, he had in the internet connection, sometimes not even a very good one, but he had one. And I think that he knew that with that, he could potentially get out of his circumstances. did he know exactly how he was going to change the world? No, but I think that he knew that positivity culture was something that he could get behind and he could potentially get famous from.
Positivity culture. This is The World Online, a live panel discussion with the Melbourne International Film Festival and the University of Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences for Life Matters on RN. Let's look at love for a minute. Let's lighten the mood. The MTV show Catfish tracks people who suspect that they are being lied to by online partners. Yoshi, can you tell us how the halo effect works here? Is that something you've worked on?
No, not quite. A halo effect is just basically sort of thinking things in a very positive light. And that's what I know of as a halo effect. Is that what you mean? Or maybe I'm
yes.
understanding it differently?
I think that, the idea is that you go online onto a dating site and you're prepared to see things in a positive light, but then it turns out that perhaps people have been telling you lies.
Right, I see. The people tend to, probably those who are going there have the mindset that I'm looking for something positive, right? And generally speaking, we tend to see things in the way that we expect. So the visual attention and the cognitive processes, encoding, memory, all these things are actually driven by our expectations and anticipations. So if we expect something positive, yes, we look for it and we tend to think it's there. And of course, that could be a fake. So yes. I guess that if that's what the halo effect is, I would say human cognitive processes are built like that.
So Khandis, we've got terrible algorithms, high expectations, bound to be dashed.
We should be very optimistic.
Yeah, and everyone's meeting online. So is this ruining romance for people now?
Oh, look, I don't think it's helping romance. I mean, part of the problem actually is that, and this is going to sound really counterintuitive, okay, but part of the problem to do with romance in the online world is that the online world gives us way too many choices when it comes to romance. Now, usually we think, oh, of course I want many choices, but actually psychologically, if you have, if I give you 26 dates and you have to choose one that you want, or 5 and you have to choose one that you want, you're going to be more satisfied if I had only given you 5 to choose from. Even if you choose the same person in both pools, the more choices you have, the less satisfied you are, the less you want to make the choice, the more you consider one person of those 26 to be pretty disposable. This is not particularly conducive to romance. And I think one of the problems here is, if you've got the average Tinder user swiping through all these people every day, like this is engendering online dating kind of like either online shopping, clearing your inbox, or going through a checklist. And it really has your focus be on you and what you want and your needs. And, part of romance and part of finding the right person is being the right person. And I think one of the things the online world does is it really skews us towards not paying much attention to who we are in relationships, but paying a lot of attention to everything we think we want and we think we need.
Lisa, do you think that our expectations of online interactions are different from our expectations of face-to-face interactions, or have we basically just transplanted our psychology onto our online interactions?
I think we go in, as has already been mentioned, I think we go in with an expectation. And so what we put in the Google search, whatever, is what we're looking for, and we'll quickly move on if it doesn't match that box. And then if we're in some area that does have the algorithm that's doing it for us, then we don't have to think about it and we just get more of what we want. So, yeah.
It's a really interesting thing you sent me recently in prep for this talk that suggested that there were plans to use an artificial intelligence in a phone counselling service. And when I stopped freaking out, I thought, what is going on there? How could that possibly be a good thing?
No, well, I was pleasantly surprised myself because it's a link up between Google, who, we know Google has all sorts of stuff going on, and an organisation called the Trevor Project. And the Trevor Project is actually a phone-based, it's a non-profit in America, phone and web chat service for, particularly for LGBTIQA plus youth, young people, and they can't service the amount of calls they're getting, they can't service the amount of chat they're getting. So they've asked for some help from Google. And so what they're looking at is looking at what is the response that the young people who are waiting online for either the web chat, the initial question they get is something like that, something like what's happening, something pretty broad. And so the young people type in something, they're going to gather all of that information and then match up with ratings of level of suicidality and self-harm that when they actually get through to a human, that those people make, and look at using some sort of wizardry, AI wizardry, to look at, can we identify the very, very highly distressed, at-risk young people very early on in that engagement through that answer to that what's happening, and quickly patch them through to the actual person that can provide them, rather than them sitting, maybe dropping out and so on and so forth. So I think it's amazing if that, and there's lots of applications like this. That's just one example. There's lots of applications like that, and that's great. That's terrific, and that's using
works.
things. Yeah, but why? I don't have any reason to think that it wouldn't. And that's fantastic, because if we can provide people with help quicker, we know that that's a really, really good thing. So that gave me hope amongst, looking at all sorts of other things.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I bet if you put that out to the public, that would not be the thing that gave them hope. We're going to get a robot to help young people who are in crisis.
Yeah, look, and it doesn't do away with the people like me and the people that I'm training on a day-to-day basis to actually work with the young people. It's a triaging thing, So it's not the answer. It's not the answer to rising youth suicide or anything like that. But it's a triaging process that can hopefully provide support quicker to people who really need it. And it still requires the young person to pick up the phone or to go online. So, there's still a lot that we need to do in other parts of that engagement. So it's not the answer, but it's a step, I think, and that's fantastic. Yeah, if it pans out, I think that's great.
Thinking still about online versus real world interactions, is cyberbullying worse than offline bullying? Do we need to think about it as a separate thing and approach it differently?
Well, I think there's two questions there. Is it worse? Is cyberbullying worse than in real life bullying? The research actually suggests no. It depends on what you're looking at in terms of an outcome, but in terms of levels of depression, anxiety and so on and so forth, there've now been a lot of big studies and a recent meta-analysis, which is where you gather all this data from lots of studies, so around lots and lots of young people, over 100,000 young people in one study, and it showed that no, there was no difference in terms of those types of outcomes. Do we have to do things differently to address them? Yes, I think we do. The anonymity is a component of online bullying that perhaps is not so rife in real life bullying. I think one thing though in all of this is to recognise that if someone's getting bullied online, they're most likely getting bullied offline as well. And I know some of the examples in your film tend to suggest otherwise, but the data actually shows that most people unfortunately are getting it both ways. So you can't disentangle them either. It's very much for lots of young people and older people too, that they come as a package, unfortunately.
Well, and for me, Jawline suggested that you might be bullied in various other parts of your life, but you could find a space online that was safe and welcoming.
Yeah, I mean, I actually felt like for a lot of the things, I mean, I feel this way personally, that like a lot of things online, there's good and bad. You can sit here and talk about the bad and the things you're worried about, and that comes across. But I think there's also like a lot of good on it too that people have found, and I felt that when I was making my film, that I felt like a lot of people were asking me like, oh, is what you're seeing good or bad? And I was like, well, there are some aspects of it that are great. Finding a community is amazing. If you can't find it in your school or in your what's within reach of you, and you could find it online, that could save your life. And it was that I saw that happen. So I think that if you can't, and the same with what you're saying about like online dating too, it's kind of like how you engage with it. If you engage with it as though you have infinite possibilities, it will drive you nuts. But if you do the work and you narrow it down yourself, and it won't drive you as crazy, And I think that people have to kind of think more about like how they're going to engage with these things, as opposed to it telling you how you're going to engage with it. Are you going to use it in a positive way? Are you going to engage with it in a healthy way? Or are you going to let it tell you how you're going to engage with it and how much you're going to engage with it?
There's also a structural element too, isn't there? I was thinking, I watched Picture Character, the emoji documentary, and it was almost like a microcosm of the digital world. There's an incredibly popular language about modern life and modern ideas, and it is controlled by a hugely unrepresentative Unicode consortium. There are no vegetable, very few vegetables in emoji because they don't like vegetables on the panel. Liza, do you think, that's crazy. Do you think there's anything that we can do to make online spaces more inclusive and less top-down, less controlled by these Svengalis, like the 21-year-old manager that was, pulling the strings of your influences?
I actually went into thinking it was more inclusive. Like I thought that, I'm someone who came up making films for the internet. And my first film, I uploaded it to Vimeo. Like it was, I actually thought of it as a space like that. But what I realized was that what has happened is everything is so oversaturated that it's actually impossible to do anything without some sort of person elevating you, pushing you, working behind the scenes. Because what he says in the film is post gold rush, where like there was a gold rush for everyone to get online and for to have your business or your personality or your celebrity or whatever show in some capacity, and now we're in a space where it almost feels like everybody is trying to do that. So now how do you get ahead in any way?
Yep, we're panning for dust in the creek beds now.
Yeah, you really do need some sort of elevation from something at this point, whether it's an understanding of how to work the system yourself or for someone to work the system for you. I think the days of like the innocent, I just started posting photos of myself and one thing after another happened and I just, got millions of followers. Like things are way calculated these days because they have to be.
Yeah. Hashtag sexy selfie.
Exactly.
I'm glad that we were able to glean some hope as well as these insights into the darker workings of the online world. Thank you so much for coming along to the World Online tonight for MIFF and Melbourne Uni School of Psychological Sciences. You can hear it on Life Matters on RN on Thursday next week. I'm Hilary Harper. This has been a conversation with Dr. Khandis Blake, Liza Mandelup, Professor Lisa Phillips and Professor Yoshi Kashima. Please give our guests a huge thank you. And thank you so much for your applause. That was really useful.